All right, welcome everyone, wherever you are. It's good evening in Israel. It's good morning here in Phoenix, Arizona, and everybody somewhere in between. I'm Chava Samuelson. I'm the Director of Jewish Studies here at ASU. I'm also Irving and Miriam Lowe Professor of Modern Judaism and Regis Professor of History. If you've been with us before, you know, because I always say the same thing in the beginning of each program, that Jewish Studies at ASU has a very robust program of public lectures in which we try to teach the general public about the history, religion, and culture of the Jews, and we deliberately engage salient and sometimes even controversial contemporary issues. Since the murderous attack of Hamas on Israeli settlement on October 7, 2023, no issue is more concerning than the future of Israel and the ongoing war between Israel and Hamas. Now, Jewish Studies at ASU recognize the need to understand, to explore and explain this complex history and the causes of the Israeli-Arab or the Israeli-Palestinian conflicts. Since October 7, we have organized several public programs that provided such information. And we're very aware that what we need to know cannot really be covered by a short program. To provide greater understanding, we also hired Dr. Adam Chefetz of the University of Haifa to teach courses about the history of Zionism, the history of the State of Israel, and Israel in the context of the modern Middle East. We hope that these courses will enable the ASU community, especially students at ASU, to be better informed about the different perspectives that Israelis hold about what's going on, that Palestinians hold about what's going on right now, and of course, various people in Arab countries in the Middle East. This morning and in the following 2 Mondays, we are going to have the pleasure of listening to Israeli scholars reflect on the state of Israel. This lecture series was organized by Dr. Nadav Berman, who is here in Phoenix as a visiting scholar of the Center for Jewish Studies at ASU. Let me introduce Dr. Berman to you, and then he will introduce the main interlocutor, Dr. Alex Yakobson. So Dr. Nadav Berman is a scholar of Jewish thought. He focuses on Jewish philosophy and theology, on philosophy of Jewish law, and on the relationship between Judaism and American pragmatism. He received his PhD from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem in 2018, and he held several postdoc fellowships or scholarships at Yale University, at Harvard University, Hebrew University, and Ben-Gurion University of the Negev. Currently, he's a research fellow at the Faculty of Law of University of Haifa, where he co-leads with Professor Tal Zarsky. Both of them lead research funded by the Israel Science Foundation on the intersection of Jewish thought, law, and technology. As already indicated this semester, or to be more precise, in September and October, Dr. Berman will be here with us at the Center for Jewish Studies. During this period, he will work on his own book manuscript, and that would add to his other publications. He has various other published essays already at the Journal of Religion, the Journal of Law and Religion, Journal of Jewish Ethics, and other venues like that. In November, he will start a new position as it's a research fellowship at a place or a new center in Bar Ilan University. The name of the center is Ma'ayan, Center for Jewish Ethics, Philosophy, and Sustainability. So we're very grateful to you, Nadav, for putting together this lecture series on the state of Israel. And now you will introduce the speaker and take us through the conversation you have in mind.
Thank you so much, Professor Chava Samuelson. It's really an honor for me to be here as a visiting scholar at ASU Phoenix. So shalom, everyone. I'm delighted to start this event. And thank you again, Chava, for really organizing it, and to you all for attending. I can't see your faces, but I thank you for joining. Thank you also, Lisa, and Gloria, and Kirsten for your help of the ASU Jewish Studies program. And in this three event series, we'd like to open a conversation with three leading Israeli Jewish scholars in order to try to figure out what is the state of Israel, what's going on. And we'll raise and address several questions about Israel, Jewish tradition, peace and war, the relationship with the Arab world, the Palestinians, and the role of peace and war within this complicated, highly complicated texture in the Middle East. And another questions would be whether Judaism or the Jewishness of the state of Israel is an obstacle for democracy or peace, or rather might be synergetic with democracy. And what role do Islam and Christianity play in Israel and in the wider regional and perhaps even global arena? And lastly, what is messianism exactly? And could it play, or would it play, or might it play some productive role within the Abrahamic structure within which Israel really is rooted and functioning? And whether messianism to its versions and branches is an obstacle for democracy and peace, or perhaps a possible contributor to this, again, highly complicated condition in which we are now finding ourselves. So today we have the honor of hosting Professor Alexander Yakobson of the History Department at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. Shalom, Alex, and thank you for joining us in this late evening or early evening stage in Jerusalem. Professor Yakobson is an expert on the Roman Empire, and also published important publications on Judaism and democracy, and also publishes regularly political commentaries in Haaretz newspaper. And your perspective, which spans so much back to late antiquity, is hopefully a resource for us to be able to think more broadly and more deeply about some of the problems that perhaps seem to many people really so hard and difficult. So this widening of the horizon, I believe, would be very productive for us today. So thank you for joining us. And today's topic is on war and peace in Israel and in Jewish tradition, or perhaps peace and war. We'll discuss the phenomenon of war and peace and war and Jewish tradition, and more so within the Israeli reality that you hear about in the news very often, but we'll try to give it some intellectual depth. And we'll try to understand the characteristics of the present war, titled as Iron Swords, Harvot Barzel, with its 101 Israeli hostages who are still held in Gaza for this 339 days. I have this sticker that Rachel, mother of Hirsch Goldberg Polin, Zichro Livracha, of blessed memory, from our community in Jerusalem, asked to wear this sticker. So this is really unbelievable, but that's a situation within which we are now. And we'll try to understand the phenomenon of war and peace within Israel's previous wars, also peace treaties. And on the other side, yes, we'll try to also to recall that Israel actually had some very successful engagements with its Arab neighbors, Egypt and Jordan, and recently some Arab states in the Gulf. by in the Abraham Accords. So let us begin. The structure of our event today would be as follows. In general, it would be an hour or a bit less. I'll present questions to you, Alex, and we'll hear your responses. After that, we'll have about 15 to 20 minutes for Q&A. So please, all of you who attend in the audience, please keep your questions and write your questions and comments in the Q&A, and I'll do my best to present them in the discussion, and hopefully we'll have here a good experience of managing to really, as Chava say, to engage difficult questions by a moderate and maybe pragmatic approach, but mainly one with patience and attentiveness to the multiplicity of voices that are here. I surely don't understand with Alex on each and everything. Surely it applies to all of us, and a fortiori, it applies to the wider human world around us. So really patience, curiosity, open-mindedness, I believe may be helpful, and we'll try to practice them. So let us start our conversation, Alex. And I attached to you above in the chat a map. As you know, maps were not given in Sinai. As one say in Talmudic Judaism, Torah מסיני זה לא מה שהיה פעם. Torah from Sinai is not what it used to be, right? In Talmudic tradition, at least, things are always open to discussion. And trying to say that this map can, of course, be disputed, but it's a possible jumping board for our conversation of how the region, Israel, Palestinian Authority, Palestine, Gaza, Hamas rule there. What are we talking about when we speak about the West Bank and the East Bank of the Mediterranean? And Alex, maybe you can provide us with some general factual picture of the situation in Israel now. It is, of course, selective, but yet we have to begin from some factual picture.
Thank you for inviting me. And obviously, anything you say on these things is controversial by definition. But the way I see it, but to me, it's obvious that, well, we are in the middle of a war, which is the longest war that Israel ever fought. And it is against, in the first instance, it is against what I would call the Hamas semi-state that was created in Gaza. It's a kind of a semi-government or semi-state. De facto, Gaza was, since Israel left Gaza in 2005 and Hamas took over by military coup in 2006, Gaza was actually a territory that was controlled by a hostile power, a hostile government, an organization whose officially proclaimed aim is to liberate Palestine from the river to the sea, as the current slogan has it. That is to say, take over the whole country and eliminate the state of Israel. They have never made any secret about it. There is no way. They are not bashful about it. They regard it as a just cause, religiously and nationally, to make Palestine Arab and Islamic. And Islamic. I would say in their parlance, it's Islamic, therefore Arabic, but it's for them, it's primarily a religious goal. But there is no question of accepting any kind of a compromise of two states or partitioning historic Palestine, the land of Israel. It's not. They are not there at all. They have never pretended to be there. Now, I must say, I was one of those Israelis who thought before October, 7th of October last year, that while it is obvious that their final goals are as stated, and that these final goals also dictate that there can never abandon the armed struggle, which is their banner. But it doesn't mean that they have to practice this armed struggle continuously. And so when you control, de facto control a relatively large territory with 2 million people, then you have some practical constraints that will make you, perhaps, of course, you can be deterred into behaving in a more on the tactical level, okay, without giving up your final goals, into providing Israel with relatively long periods of relative quiet. And on this assumption, for this you need deterrence, but also you need to enable more or less normal economic activity. You have to prevent humanitarian crisis and all that. Now, all this collapsed on the 7th of October. It turned out that the Hamas government in Gaza was willing to impose a total war on Israel, a real war, not another one in the series of clashes that we had that they provoked. But they attacked Israel in a way that made it more or less inevitable that Israel would decide that we can no longer live along this kind of a threat. The attack of 7th of October was horrific and cruel, and if one wishes to get an idea, this is several times, many times 9/11 by American standards, if you count the population. And so it's obvious that Israel can no longer live alongside a threat of that kind that you can neither contain nor deter, and certainly you cannot bribe it into anything, by some economic concession. So it became imperative, I think, there was a very large consensus that this Hamas semi-state, this Hamas government that controls the whole army, that of course it could never have emerged if the Palestinians in Gaza had to do it on their own. They did a good job militarily, I have to admit, but there was massive Iranian support. That is the regional power, the other regional power, which is Iran, which has a program of encircling. Also, they're quite open about it. They're quite open about the point that they will not accept any compromise, any two states, any territorial arrangement. They regard Israel as fundamentally legitimate, and they are creating this, what we now call the circle of fire around Israel. You have Hamas in the south, you have Hezbollah in the north, you have Houthi militias that are now attacking Israel by rockets that have actually imposed a naval blockade. The port of Eilat doesn't function for almost a year. Israel is under a naval blockade because there is no shipping. They've paralyzed free shipping to our southern ports, and you have militias in Syria and Iraq that may join the fray. They have not done it actively until now. So that's part of a large. So obviously, after the 7th of October, Israel could no longer accept the existence of this terrorist entity that is part of this larger circle around it. So the obvious aim of the war is to put an end to this armed entity, Hamas armed entity. I think I must say that the expression destroying Hamas, wiping out Hamas, or absolute victory, as our prime minister uses this expression, I think these are just populist slogans. There is anyone understands you cannot totally eradicate a movement like Hamas, but the fact that this formulation is populist and not realistic should not, I think, disguise the fact that behind it there is a real aim, a realistic aim. By the way, the decision of the government, the resolution of the Israeli cabinet, does not say eradicating Hamas. It says putting and dismantling the governmental and military capabilities of Hamas in Gaza. And this, by the way, this is more or less a realistic goal, not the rhetoric of, which creates the impression that we'll fight until until the last Hamasnik is killed in Gaza, which is not a serious proposition. By the way, Hamas also exists not only in Gaza. So by now, I think what has happened, and of course, everyone has to understand that dismantling the Hamas entity in Gaza in practice means taking over Gaza, the territory. And that could only come at a frightful humanitarian cost because Hamas is totally immersed in the civilian population. You have to in every war, there is a dilemma that in a usual war, most military aims of the enemy are outside civilian areas. You have between Ukraine and Russia, most military forces of Ukraine and of Russia are outside the population centers. But there are always also military or quasi-military strategically important targets that are in the midst of civilian communication centers, headquarters, military industries, all things like that. The moral dilemmas of collateral damage and the rules of engagement always have to do with this second part, whether this target is important enough to attack, considering that when you attack it in the midst of civilian population, you are likely to cause damage. Tel Aviv also has military targets. Everyone knows that the Ministry of Defense and the Israeli General Staff are in Tel Aviv. So if you attack them from afar, of course, there is also a danger of collateral damage. The difference between this war and every conflict I can think of, really every conflict I can think of, is that in the case of Hamas, really, I think more or less 100% of the military targets of the enemy are in the very midst of civilian population. There is no such thing as a Hamas military unit that is not among the population. And we all know that the main military force of Hamas is actually the tunnels, this system of tunnels that is right under this underground, this metro which they built in Gaza. It is right under the populated areas. And in many cases, it is not just under populated areas, but it is under schools and hospitals and UN centers, and every conceivable humanitarian object will very often have these tunnels. And sometimes the most important people are there, of course, because they regard these things as a protection. So in those people who say to us, you have a right to defend, you have a right to go after Hamas after this massacre, but you should not kill civilians, or you should not kill many civilians. These are really empty words. There is no way we can go after Hamas, which is in the midst, in the heart, and under the main centers of civilian population in Gaza, without causing frightful physical damage and many civilian casualties. I think the IDF is really trying to avoid excessive civilian casualties, but anyone who expected this war not to look horrible, and it is horrible. It is horrible and it looks horrible. Anyone who says you have a moral right to fight, but you are morally wrong once you cause this damage, they're actually telling us, leave Hamas, allow them to control Gaza, to rule over Gaza, and to start preparing the next 7th of October, which is something they openly have stated repeatedly. Of course, that they will, of course, if they draw the conclusions from this round, that Israel cannot destroy this entity, even after what happened on the 7th of October, there is nothing that they will have to fear, because they don't fear civilian casualties. They will know that they can start, with the help of the Iranian patrons, planning the next attack, being sure that Israel would not do anything that really frightens them. And what really frightens them, more or less, is that Israel will be able, at this frightful cost, to put an end to this fortress, to destroy this fortress that the Iranians and their Palestinian allies, the Palestinians and the Iranian patrons have built during some 16 years alongside our southern border.
Wow, thanks, Alex. That was a good outlook on the situation, which is of course much more detailed. And yesterday there was a new frontier. Hopefully, it's not a frontier, but only really murderous act in the Allenby terminal. And things unfortunately, yes, I don't know if the world is evolving, but perhaps deteriorating. Hopefully, nothing new is going to happen there. But we know that there are many Palestinian refugees, or or third, fourth generation Palestinian refugees in Jordan. So the situation, as you said, is very complex, and we hope that along the way of this conversation, we'll hear some not only descriptive analysis, but also some prescriptive suggestions, maybe, or how you think things might get better. So bear with us, dear audience. We'll hear some more. And as I said in the beginning, we want to give this war and this broader conflict with Iran and some other proxies that they deploy against Israel. We want to widen our intellectual scope and wonder and ask and ponder a little bit about the concepts of peace and war in Jewish tradition, and how do they reappear, perhaps transpose within the current Israeli discourse. You may, we try to keep right. We have a challenge here. We want to keep the discussion like 40,000 feet high, but we do want to be with boots on the ground in the sense of trying to address concrete processes, etc. So I'd be happy to now hear what you think about peace and war in Jewish tradition, and your highly learned perspective about the Roman Empire and their concept of prohibited wars, etc., might be very illuminating. And in the sources we gathered here, there are actually many sources from this weekly portion, Parashat Shavua, Shoftim, and the next one, and some midrashic engagement and commentaries on this weekly portion, which really tries to make sense and order in a condition, right? Think of Deuteronomy, of a very, I don't know if very similar, but again, it was a period of war with Moses and the Israelites entering Canaan, and would be glad, Alex, to hear what you think about. Again, we can't exhaust anything here, but about this juxtaposition of old sources and the present war.
It's always a very complicated question, how in any ancient culture, how the ancient cultural roots actually influence today's arguments. Well, of course, there are many texts in the Jewish tradition that are against bloodshed, that present war as a bad thing. Okay, I think actually, in my view, the most impressive anti-war part of the ancient Jewish tradition is God's answer to David when he wanted to build the temple in Jerusalem that would that Hamas, not only Hamas, claims that never existed, but in any case, the temple in Jerusalem that Solomon would eventually build, but David was prohibited from building it because you have waged many wars and you have shed a lot of blood. You have shed. God says you cannot build, you will not build a temple to me, to my name, because you have shed too much blood. That means that, that a war is always a lamentable necessity, even if it is a necessity. So that's a very, in that sense, a noble sentiment. But I must say, on the other hand, that as far as I understand, I'm not an expert on Jewish tradition, correct me, but my impression is that there is no general, since Judaism is such a legalistic religion, it is really, uh, as historically shaped, it is a system based on norms. So what God said to David is actually, it's not a commandment. It is an authoritative statement, but it is not, cannot be described as, it doesn't command, uh, not something that a religious Jew will say, this is, I'm commanded to do this or that. Judaism and Islam, by the way, they're both based on the system of prohibitions and commandments. Now, there is no general halachic prohibition, a prohibition in religious law against an aggressive war in the Jewish tradition. It doesn't say you cannot fight a war unless you're attacked. Of course, there is a commandment to conquer the land of Israel. Then there is in the Jewish tradition, Moses argues with God actually, and makes sure that there will be offers of peace before. But that is a specific thing. Generally, there is no norm in the Jewish religious law that says a Jewish king, a Jewish kingdom is not allowed to start a war because they want to conquer a neighbor's territory. On the other hand, as a Roman historian, I can tell you that in the Roman law, in the Roman culture, there is a very specific norm, which is both legal, enshrined in religion, that says that the Roman people are not allowed to fight unjust wars. Wars have to be just, and all the modern international law prohibition against aggressive wars is ultimately can be traced back through all kinds of stages, medieval and later things. They all went back to the Roman law theory of bellum justum, of a just war. Now, if you look at the map and you recall the history of the Roman Empire, you don't get the impression that this prohibition against aggressive wars, specifically, you're not allowed to start a war in order to conquer a territory. If the war was just and you take over your neighbor's territory, then you are not allowed to restore it. That you are not ordered. You are not under an obligation to withdraw from it. So this is, all the wars are just, and this is how we conquered the world. So you can be a bit cynical, and you can say it is the connection between cultural and even legal or religiously legal norms and actual behavior is not always very straightforward. There is an argument between historians of Rome if this prohibition ever exercised some real influence. I think it sometimes did, but generally you still look at the map and you know what was conquered by the Romans. So I would say that I'm not sure there is a direct way to learn something from ancient sources to today's political behavior. We know that when religious people behave, when religious people on both sides of any conflict, when they explain their views, they go back to religious origin. They quote scripture. They quote the sages, and they call the Talmud. But I must say, in Israeli history, at least in the last decade, since 67, you can argue about 67, but in the last decades, when we deal with the question of the territories that Israel conquered in June 67, the argument between doves and hawks, between the right and left, between those who call themselves the peace camp, and all those arguments about the future of territories, they are not about whether one is allowed to conquer territory, because the Israeli right, even before 67, maybe there was a marginal group, but the main forces of the Israeli right, both religious and secular, had not said before 67 that since Judea and Samaria is part of the Jewish homeland and part of the Promised Land, we should initiate a war in order to take over this part of the ancient biblical Israel. There was no serious demand for that. And I don't think that was a real background for the war. Since 67, the argument in Israel is not about whether it is allowed to start an aggressive war for conquest. Nobody is proposing that. The argument is whether we should, for peace, or even unilaterally, withdraw from the territories, from those territories that we took over in June 67, and the hawks, the Israeli right, they say that if we do that, we will not get any peace. They do not accept that the choices between peace and territorial compromise, between, that if you want that you have to fight for the territories. They say if we leave those territories, we will get less peace rather than more peace. Now, as a matter of fact, you can say that their case was disproved, more or less, by the peace treaty with Egypt that was signed by the mainstream Israeli right wing, by a Likud government under Begin, and in the framework of which Israel ceded most of the territory that it conquered in 67. And since then we have peace. So whatever troubles we have with Egypt, the idea of land for peace has been vindicated vis-a-vis the Egyptians. Whereas I must say, as someone who supported the Oslo agreements and the decision to go out of Gaza, the experience with the Palestinians is very problematic in this respect. And certainly the experience with Hamas, there is no question that the experience with the Hamas is you get out the territory that you evacuate, you will not get any peace, you will get less peace, much less peace. You are just exposing Israel to a danger. So on the other hand, I think that if we keep those territories in the end, if there is no partition, if there is no two-state solution, which I support, in the end, I think it is a danger to the state of Israel, but not a military danger. It is a political danger because I think that in the end, there will be a one state which will not be Israel. So it is not a classical example of doves and hawks in the sense who wants to fight for territorial enlargement and who is opposed to wars of aggression or wars of territorial expansion. Even the extreme right in Israel is not actually proposing territorial extension. They are saying we don't want to, they oppose territorial concessions, and they claim that as a matter of fact, this will not lead to peace. And this is what we have to argue.
Wow, that was so interesting. Having a conversations with you in the past, maybe you could elaborate by what do you mean that Israel would not, if there would be only one state between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, you obviously mean, right, it won't be Jewish, there would be no Jewish majority in the designated territory known as the State of Israel, and that it won't be a democracy, right, or both, right, because democracy
it will be neither a Jewish state nor a democracy, in my view. But first of all, I must say that I want to start with saying that, in my view, it is a matter of principle that both peoples, I think this is a classical example, the conflict between Israel and the Palestinians is a classical example of two peoples, two distinct national identities, two national movements, two national narratives in one land, in one country, in one territory. And so I think the principle of self-determination, of national self-determination, applies. This is a classical case. There are all kinds of complications connected with how you implement the principle in many situations. In this situation, as a matter of principle, it's a very straightforward case of a situation where there are two peoples that both have a right to a state of their own. And that is a right that was recognized by the international community in 47 by UN partition plan that was based on this premise that there are two peoples that both desire and deserve national independence, and therefore you should give them their distinct national independence in two separate states, and these will cooperate and all that. And this is the premise of the two-state solution as supported by the international community today. So I think it is a matter of principle and not just a matter of and not just a matter of practical politics. But as a matter of practical politics, if you say there is actually a good case on Israel's part to say, well, that I don't accept that Israel is under moral obligation to give up territory, to give territory to forces that are making no secret of the fact that they intend to use those territories in order to fight us, in order to take over the whole country. No one is under an obligation to allow anyone to be in a stronger position for a continuation of the war. By the way, if the Palestinians would take over the whole territory, and by any miracle, there would still be millions of Jews living under occupation. This is not my prediction, but assuming I'm wrong, and there would be a Palestinian rule over a disfranchised Jewish Israeli population, of course it would be right to demand that they should allow Israelis to have a state. But I must say that if the Jewish national movement would be dominated by the likes of the Israeli extreme right, the people who are saying that they should take the whole country at all costs, then there would be no obligation on the part of the Palestinians to allow Mr. Ben-Gvir and Mr. Smotrich to take any part of the country and then to fight the Palestinian state in order to destroy. I don't think there is any difference between Jews and Palestinians in this respect. Any country has a right to defend itself, and no country is under obligation to make fighting against it easier for its enemy. So, considering that Hamas is by no means a marginal group among the Palestinians, and considering that the PA after the Second Intifada is at best also a very dubious peace partner, at best, not like Hamas, but that's another argument. But even just, even if we just notice the power of Hamas and the danger that they present given the regional support, there is a strong case for Israel to say, we will, in the meantime, there is any case, a strong case to say we will stay in those territories, or at least we will refuse a total withdrawal as long as this is dictated by security. But imagine that we convince the world that in any case, a partition of this is a very difficult thing. It's a small piece of land with a mixture, an ethnic mixture in many areas, which we also contributed to by settlements, which is a grievous mistake in my view. But in any case, it's a fact of life that there are Jews and Arabs on both sides of the Green Line in great numbers now. So we could say, well, whatever the theoretical principles, in fact, it is no longer possible or desirable to partition, to create an artificial border within such a small and crowded piece of land like the country from the river to the sea. And then if we persuade the international public opinion of this, the logical answer is, okay, there is no longer two states, but just, if you rule the whole country, the next step is you have to give the citizenship and the vote to all. If you want to keep Judea, Samaria, and Gaza, you have to make all the Judeans, Samaritans, or how you call them, and Gazans citizens of Israel, of course. There is no other civilized way. There is no other civilized or politically feasible way to claim a territory without saying that in the end, maybe not immediately, but in the end, all the people living in that territory that you intend to keep have to be citizens of the state that rules them. Now, theoretically, that would create a binational state, but I don't believe it would create a binational state. I think it will create an Arab and Muslim state, if only because we are not in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean. We're in the middle of the Arab-Muslim Middle East. in which Israel is regarded as a foreign entity, and well, many people accept it because it's a fact of life. But under this scenario, it will no longer be a fact of life. Moreover, then you have the issue of the right of return, and such a state will not be able, either practically or as a matter of principle, to prevent. It will have no reason and no ability to prevent and not just return. I think it will all be a magnet for Arab immigration because of the economic conditions and other conditions. So in the end, you will very quickly create an Arab majority. Now, an Arab majority state in the heart of the Middle East will not be binational, whatever you write in its constitution. It will be Arab and Muslim and Sunni, because an Arab nation state is the only kind of government that is considered legitimate for the Arab public opinion in an Arab majority country in the Arab Middle East. Okay, so to believe that Arab nationalists will and Islamic fundamentalists will give up the Arab character of an Palestine which will have an Arab majority in favor of the Zionist Jews when Berbers and Kurds are not, are not allowed either national independence or, Iraq still defines itself as an Arab state. It's a member of an Arab League. I think that creating an Arab majority country in the middle, in the heart of the Middle East is you cannot scientifically prove anything in the future, but I think it is extremely unlikely that any other result will in the end emerge except another Arab regime. Now, it so happens that we have polls among Israeli Arabs, most of them, when they have to choose between being citizens of Israel as a minority with all their complaints and becoming part of a united state in the whole of Palestine, which they understand will be Arab, most of them prefer to be citizens of Israel. So Israeli Arabs don't want to live in an Arab majority state in the whole of Palestine, and Israeli Jews also don't.
Thanks, Alex. Yes, these are, these pragmatic considerations are important because much of the discourse is usually, resting upon information and processes of the past. But one of the questions about policy making and about the present is what are the possible scenarios and what are the we might call exit scenarios from this war. So first of all, if I echo your view correctly, you say that if an Arab state, one Arab state would be founded between the Mediterranean and the Jordan River, it won't not only not be Jewish, it won't be democratic. And what we see in Gaza, for example, might be indicative of that. I wanted to ask you two questions before and maybe we don't have a lot of time, but we'll also be, we heard a little bit of what could be the constraints of a possible resolution. But before we get to this future-oriented question, I wanted to ask you first about the temple that you mentioned. Interestingly, King David's refusal by God to build a temple. And we know that the Temple Mount still plays a role. We just read in the news that Netanyahu ordered the ministers not to ascend to the Temple Mount without his very direct permission. And it's quite probable that at least Ben-Gvir, Minister of Inferior or Security, would not be very joyful about that. There are people, and I should say I'm among them, who think that the Temple Mount plays a very significant role in fueling the conflict in recent years, because the statistics are quite extraordinary. If you explore, the numbers between 2009 and the beginning, actually, of this intifada, we could say that we are now, since October 2015, in one long intifada that really deteriorized. But in these 5 years, the beginning of Netanyahu's governments, there were 30-something Israeli, casualties in terror actions. It sounds unbelievable because now, just 2 days ago, there were, and the numbers are so terrible. So I'm curious to hear what you'd say about the role of the Temple Mount, that for many secular Israelis it seems like an invisible factor. And for some religious players, for example, Ben Gvir and Moshe Feiglin, former Knesset member, for them this is a war about the Temple Mount, and then Hamas in agreement about some ultimate goal. But it's interesting, in my opinion, that for many Israelis, even religious ones, Jewish religious ones, our actions in the temple are seemingly out of the calculation. And it seems, if you take Netanyahu's order here, and by the way, also before the signing of the Abraham Accords, he was also declaring even earlier in the summer that no one is ascending to the Temple Mount without his permission. It's interesting for me to hear what you think about that. Again, given that Israel is very secular in a sense, that the religion and Jewish religion, Christianity, Islam, other important religions are considered, but Israel is a fairly secular state in this regard. And on this particular question, it's not our topic today to distinguish between synagogue Judaism and temple Judaism, but according at least to the statistics of the Shabak, of the security service in Israel, it makes a difference. So my question would be, how do you see the roles that the temple and perhaps the temple movements are playing now vis-a-vis the possibility to make it to some peaceful future?
Well, the official policy of this government, of all Israeli governments, is that there is the status quo on the Temple Mount should be preserved. And as part of it, Jews should have a right to go there, but they should not pray. There should not be any religious activities, Jewish religious activities on the Temple Mount. Now, I think the Prime Minister is officially committed to it, and I don't think he's being hypocritical about it. I think he doesn't want to open this file. He doesn't want to invite a religious war, a conflict all the Muslim world. But his problem is that he established a coalition with the extreme right, including these fanatical groups who are the extremely religious right. I think it is still the case that at least for many religious Orthodox Jews, it is not only not an obligation, but it is actually not allowed from the halachic point of view for Jews to, while the Israeli government allows it, many rabbis don't allow it. So it's also a controversial thing because of the laws of purity. It's a hellishly complicated thing, but the bottom line is that all Israeli governments have maintained their commitment to the status quo. But the problem is, once you appoint someone like Ben Gvir as a minister of internal security in charge of the police, then of course he creates provocations that cater to the sector, to the extremist sector that he's representing. And now Netanyahu has said that he will not allow any of this without his permission. I think he should have said it long ago, and he should have enforced it. But the main thing that he should not have done, he should never have appointed Mr. Ben Gvir to this position. It is a horrible thing that you have people like that as part of the Israeli coalition. But this is part of Israeli politics and the Israeli coalition politics and things like that. But if you ask me,
yes, I would make your life a bit harder by saying that, back in 2019, Netanyahu was personally involved in the inserting of Ben Gvir into the then Beit Yehudi, the Jewish Home Party. So one might say that it's not just a very local, constraints. Some parties, Yesh Atid, who were refusing to form a coalition with Netanyahu, but we won't really stay on the wider question of the temple. So you spoke about the status quo. I would also ask another question which I think points us to the future-oriented, horizon. And it is about the, it's already forgotten, but the Bennett program that author Avraham Bully Joshua Yoshua was also supportive of. Micha Goodman, an Israeli public intellectual, also supported. And I think it's important to think about it because I think much of the frustration within the inhabitants of Israeli citizens who live in Judea and Samaria or the West Bank, or again the linguistics is disputed here, are frustrated because there is no solution. And they live in some sense in the Wild West, right? I'm here in the domesticated West, in the great, in the US and in Phoenix, it's peaceful. But in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, there is no solution. And I think some of the energy, which is destructive, that supports the seemingly unending, continuation of this war, comes from people that, receive no solution. In this regard, I was wondering if the unwillingness to compromise upon even partial, non-ideal solution to the at least A areas, right, in the West Bank, in Judea and Samaria, whether the unwillingness to compromise about some solution that would divide the populations did not really come here, with in a reaction, terrible reaction that supports a war that could perhaps ended before or could end way before it might end, in 1 or 2 years.
If I ask myself, no, in the end, is there still hope for creating a situation that will enable us to do what, in my view, is really right as a matter of principle, which is a partition between two peoples for whom this country is their homeland? I think that that time may come when there is a change in Tehran. And this will happen, of course, just nobody has ever promised us that it will come in the near future, but regimes like that fall sooner or later. And I think the Iranian society is actually ripe for it, but the regime is very strong. But in Iran, if this horrible regime falls, then there is a great chance in Iran for something better to emerge from a revolution, unlike what happened in the Arab world after the Arab revolutions that did not lead to anything very positive. But I think the Iranian society is different. And we know that there is no reason for any conflict between Israel and Iran as a matter of national interest, and not interpreted, through the eyes of aggressive religious fanatics. So if you want my optimistic scenario, it is that once you have this, I think the whole relations between moderates and extremists in the Arab street will change, because now all the radical forces in the Arab world are relying on Iranian support. And all the moderates or relative moderates, okay, because that is a relative term, but if we ignore these differences, we could not exist in the Middle East. We have been living there because we have been able to rely on the non-conflict with most of the Arab world most of the time. And certainly now we have actual relations with Arab states, even friendly relations. So I think that if the Iranian threat to Israel and to all Arab moderates is removed, I think then there is a real hope that things, it will be somehow in this future, it may be safe enough for